Trotsky, in his history of the revolution, described the character of this July 1st demonstration. To compensate the masses for the loss of their demonstration, the Congress of Soviets itself organized an unarmed demonstration for July 1st, and that day became the day of our political triumph. The masses turned out in overwhelming numbers, but although they came out in answer to the call of the official Soviet authority, a sort of counterblast to the miscarried demonstration of June 23rd, the workers and soldiers had inscribed on their banners and placards the battle cries of our party. Down with secret treaties, down with the policy of strategical offenses, long live an honorable peace, down with the 10 capitalist ministers, all power for the Soviets. This demonstration proved not only to our opponents, but also to ourselves, that we were far stronger in Petrograd than we had imagined. By this time, the workers' movement in Russia was gaining steam, and the Bolsheviks were gaining support from the masses at the expense of the SRs and Mensheviks, who continually compromised their interests so they could maintain a coalition with the capitalist class. On July 15th, the Cadet Party, which was a far-right party, resigned from the government. The Bolsheviks called on the SRs and Mensheviks to take this opportunity to break with the capitalists and take all power into the hands of the Soviets. But they again refused, trying to continue towing the middle ground between the capitalists and the working class. On July 16th, the Petrograd garrison called for a demonstration of workers in the capital. The Bolsheviks came out and supported this demonstration. Workers surrounded the Tahrir Palace, where the Executive Committee of the Soviet, which was still under the control of the SRs and Mensheviks at the time, was holding its meeting. Some workers attempted to arrest the ministers for their continued collusion with the international capitalist class in the prosecution of the war. On July 17th, these demonstrations took on a more formidable character under the direct leadership of the Bolshevik Party. The demonstration was larger and more militant, and this time it was met with violence. The provisional government put down this demonstration with military force. Workers were beat up in the streets and arrested. Lenin fled to Finland, and Trotsky was put in prison. The Bolsheviks were persecuted and their press was shut down. Attempts were made by the government to call this demonstration a conspiracy linked to the German war machine, which proved to be untrue. The provisional government used this demonstration as an opportunity to crack down on workers. The death penalty was reinstated in the military. Old czars and ministers were brought into the government to investigate and interrogate participants in the July demonstrations, and attempts were made to restore the police force and discipline in the military. The organs of the old czar state were being employed by the capitalists in an attempt to crush the workers' movement and the Soviets. And the SRs and Mensheviks supported these measures to suppress the Bolsheviks and worker militants in the country. But the property classes were uneasy now. They were uncertain of the provisional government's ability to handle the governing of the country in their interests. The last few months had passed with a number of close calls, and they were no closer to quelling the workers' movement and consolidating their power. Thus, the reactionary classes turned to military conspiracy. In August, German forces captured the town of Riga and were approaching the capital of Petrograd. This was used as a pretext for General Kornilov to move troops closer to Petrograd, without the authorization of the government. Kornilov's plan was to move his troops into the capital, crush the Soviets, and instill martial law and a military dictatorship. Kerensky was aware of this plan beforehand and was even offered the role of military dictator. But Kerensky was distrustful of Kornilov and suspected that if Kornilov succeeded, that his government and his role in power would be over. So the provisional government made an attempt to crush Kornilov's uprising. The problem with this was that Kornilov didn't have much mass support or control over the military. And so he couldn't mobilize forces to defend Petrograd on his own. Only the Soviets and the Bolsheviks had the support at this period of time and the power to mobilize a defense of the capital. So Trotsky and other Bolsheviks were released from prison and allowed to organize workers for the defense of Petrograd against Kornilov. In the face of this united front of workers and organizations coordinated by the Bolsheviks and the military garrisons who supported the Bolshevik Party, Kornilov's forces collapsed and he didn't even reach Petrograd. One of the main reasons for this collapse of Kornilov's forces is There was agitation carried out within his own military to sort of show people that they really had no interest in basically partaking in a military coup that was going to instill a military dictatorship. So once this was sort of brought to light, a lot of the forces who were on his side just completely were unwilling to carry out these plans. So soon after the defeat of Kornilov, the Bolsheviks won a majority in the elections to the Soviet. Now in September, Lenin began to agitate that the Bolsheviks help organize an insurrection that would topple the provisional government and transfer all power to the Soviets. Lenin recognized that the provisional government was meek in facing up to the counter-revolution, as well as in ending the war. Kerensky had been discussing for a time now about surrendering Petrograd to the Germans and had made no plans for the defense of the capital. Actions like these would spell an end to the revolution. For instance, when the Germans entered Riga, they dissolved the Soviets, crushed workers' organizations, and re-established control with the collaboration of the old Tsar's police force. The capitalists were well prepared to surrender Petrograd to German forces because they feared the workers. And another thing that the capitalist class had been doing for months is shutting down factories in the country, which threw the economy into a deeper disorganization and disarray. So the Bolsheviks saw that really the only way to ensure the victory of the revolution would be transfer power into the hands of the working class, who would carry on the tasks of ending the war and reorganizing the destroyed economy. Trotsky was quoted saying that the Petrograd Soviet was not silent. It demanded the immediate assumption of authority by the central and local Soviets, the immediate transference of land to the peasants, and the establishment of control by workers over industry, and the immediate initiation of peace negotiations. But Lenin initially struggled in gaining support for the idea of an insurrection within the Bolshevik Party. The elements of the party who were resisting this idea were some of the more intellectual members, some of the members who have been in the party for a long time and were really just kind of hesitant to sort of carry this forward. But these types of people were a minority within the Bolshevik Party. Throughout 1917, the Bolsheviks had grown into a truly mass-based working-class party. By October of 1917, well over 2/3 of Bolshevik Party members were working-class people. And these working-class radicals were the ones who put pressure on the intellectual ranks in the leadership to support Lenin's proposal for insurrection. While the Bolsheviks were trying to agitate for the toppling of the provisional government, Kerensky was trying to consolidate its power. The soldiers in the Petrograd garrison posed a threat to his rule because they were supportive of the Bolsheviks. Attempts and calls have been made for months now by many elements of the provisional government to disband the more radical elements of the garrison, but to no avail. So in mid-October, Kerensky called for removing 2/3 of the Petrograd garrison from the city and made plans to send them to the front. This sparked a series of protests against this measure, which was clearly an attempt to remove opposition to the provisional government. Kerensky took this decision to the Soviet Executive Committee, which was now dominated by a newly elected Bolshevik majority, to try to ratify the movement of this garrison. But the Soviet refused, and instead helped to establish the Military Revolutionary Committee, which was to be attached to the Soviet. Finally, in October, after more than a month of debate and agitation, the Bolsheviks adopted a resolution saying that the only means for saving the revolution was to transfer power into the hands of the working class, and set about to organize an insurrection to topple the provisional government and capture strategic points of power. Many mass organizations and military units also passed formal resolutions calling for the transfer of all power to the Soviets. And here's another quote from Trotsky's History of the Revolution. All power to the Soviets, such was the demand of our party. In the preceding period, this meant, in terms of party divisions, complete authority for the Socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks as against a coalition with the liberal bourgeoisie. Now, however, in October, this demand meant the complete supremacy of the revolutionary proletariat